In this technique video, I'm going to show you how to take fine silver wire and make it into a ring band. So you'll take your fine silver wire, you'll wrap it around a mandrel for the size of ring that you want. Then you will cut and close your jump rings. So these ones are all cut and closed and ready to fuse. These two rings here, I've already fused them and they've been tumbled, and so they're just ready to go, ready to be worn. And these are nice, smooth little round ring bands with no added texture. And then these ring bands, I went ahead and I added texture to them with a chasing hammer. And these are cute little bands. You can stack a bunch on your finger if you like. You could always embellish them with beads, or you could just wrap some maybe gold wire around a section of them just to add a little bit of accent. So I'm going to get set up here and show you the products and tools you'll need to make a ring band. So today for my example, I'm going to be using 14 gauge fine silver wire. Generally for making a ring band, I normally use between 10 to 16 gauge fine silver. For our tools that we'll need to make the ring bands, you will need a steel ring mandrel. Optional, I have some ring sizers. These help you figure out what size ring you need. I have two types of flesh cutters. I prefer to use the Tronex Ergonomic razor flesh cutters for gauges 14 or finer, and then I use the full flush Power Max cutters for gauges 10 and 12. I have my butane micro torch. I have my triple refined butane. I have my pumice fire brick. I've got a cooling cup and some tweezers, or you can use old pliers. I have some chain nose pliers or some nylon jaw pliers. I've got my safety glasses. I've got a chasing hammer, and then optional, I've also got a plastic mallet. So I'm going to get set up and show you how to make some rings. Okay, so I'm set up here to make some fused ring bands. So I've already used my ring sizer to figure out what size ring I want, and I'm going to do a couple of size 7s. So the nice thing about the sizer here, it just has the numbers right on there, so you can just you check your size, or you can check your customer size. So these are just kind of handy, but it's not a necessity to make the ring. So I'm just going to go ahead and set that aside since I already know that I want to make some size 7s. So the first ring that I'm going to make here is just going to be a plain band with no texture. So I went ahead and I just cut my spool of the fine silver wire into about 6-inch pieces. And so you're going to take your ring mandrel, and I'm just going to set some of my wire at the side here. And you can see on your ring mandrel, it's all got your sized here with numbers, and then it's got, quarter sizes and half sizes. So I know this first ring band, I want to make a size 7. So to do that, since how this ring will not be textured or sized up, you want to wrap it around the ring mandrel right at the size 7. So you take your 6 inches of wire, and you can put your ring mandrel in a vise if that's helpful for you to hold on to it. But just for this video, I'm just going to have it sitting here on my bead board. And you want to make sure that when you're wrapping it around the mandrel, that it is tight. Because if it's too loose, then it will be bigger than a size 7. So you just take your wire and you wrap it and just cross it over and make sure it's sitting right at that size 7. And just make sure it's nice and tight there. Mine's a little loose here, so I'm just going to pull it a little tighter. There. And that is all there is to it, wrapping it around. So then I slide that off. And see, now you can see you have a nice shape here. But then I've got these tails. So then I'm going to take my Tronex cutters. And you want to make sure you have nice flush cutters for your fine silver, because you need a nice flush cut to be able to fuse the wire. So you want to make sure that you're using the flat surface that is going to be into the ring base here, because you want two flat ends coming together to make a nice seam. So you take your cutters, and I'm just going to pull this apart just so slightly so that I don't mar the other metal when I'm cutting this. And make sure that your cutters are nice and flush. And you just want to make sure that they're sitting straight across there. You don't want it to be at an angle or anything, because that will not fuse a good ring band. So make sure you have a nice straight cut, and then you just trim it along there. So set that tail side. So you can see I have a nice clean flush cut on that one side. So it looks nice and good. And now I just need to do the same thing on this opposite side. So again, making sure that your flat side is towards your ring and that the nub part here that you cut off is going to be on your tail. So taking your flush cutters, you don't want it to overlap. You want it to just meet exactly where that other seam is at there. And you just do a nice even cut there. I'll take that off. And there we have two nice edges. You can see that they're nice and flush. There's no burrs. So that should make a nice ring. Then a lot of times the fine silver is pretty soft. So you can just use your fingers to work it back and forth to close your jump ring. But if you want, you can also use the Nylon Jaw Pliers, or you can use chain nose pliers. Just make sure when you're using the chain nose pliers, just don't be too heavy-handed, because the fine silver is very soft and it's easy to mar. And since how this ring band, we're not going to add any texture or anything, we want it to be as smooth as possible when it's fused. So I'm just going to take my Nylon Jaw Pliers on one side and use my finger on the other side and just work it and get that seam together there. And this is the secret to making a nice fused ring, is you need to make sure that seam is nice and flush, that there's no burrs, and that there's no space in between. And I always like to just run my finger over the top and make sure that it doesn't snag on anything, so I know that no sides are sticking up. So that is a really nice ring there. So I've got my little size 7. And so that one, I'm just going to set that aside, and I'm going to make a couple more here. So I'm going to make a second ring, just like I did that one, just to go over it one more time. So this one's just going to be a plain ring band that we're not going to texture. So just taking my 6 inches again, I'm going to bring it under my ring mandrel, and I'm going to wrap it tight right at the 7 mark on the ring mandrel. And you want to have the little bit of extra wire here so that you can really pull on it and make sure it's nice and tight. If you cut your wire too short, it's kind of hard to get those little ends and get a nice round ring there around your mandrel. So I'm just going to slide that off, and there we've got a nice ring, nice shape there. And again, in the same fashion as we did the first one, you're just going to take your Tronex cutters, and you're going to want to do a nice flush cut on both sides. And again, I'm just going to open it up just a little bit so I don't mar my other side of my wire there. And so I just want to make sure that it's nice and straight. Get a nice straight edge there. And trim that, and you set that tail. So you can kind of see how the light's reflecting off that, so I know it's a nice, good cut. And then I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. And again, you don't want it to be overlapping. You just want them to meet up. So you just want to make sure they're just meeting right up there. And there, I've got my second ring, has really nice flush cuts there. So again, I'm just going to take my Nylon Jaw Pliers, and then I'm just going to work it back and forth to close this ring. When you hear that snap, you know it's good. It's like it's nice, it's tight, it's got that pressure on there. And again, just run your finger over there and make sure like there's just nothing sticking up. Then you know that it's really meeting up and it's got a good connection. So this should be a really nice ring, and it'll be easy to fuse. So I've got my 2 size 7s set aside there. So I'm just going to put those there. Now I'm going to make a couple of rings, but these rings, I'm going to have some texture to them. So when you are adding a ring that you're going to put texture on, you always want to size it 2 sizes down from your actual ring size. So if you want it to be a finished ring of size 7, you will want to wrap it at the 5 mark. If you want it to be a size 8, you'd wrap it at the 6 mark. That works for the bigger gauges. If you get to the really fine gauges like 16 and above, you probably only want to do 1 size above, because the finer gauge, you can't really stretch it out that far before it becomes too fine and you could end up breaking your ring. So if you're doing, like 10, 12, or 14, you do 2 sizes smaller than you want your finished size to be, and then like 16 and above, you just do 1 size. So since I'm working with the 14 gauge, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do mine 2 sizes smaller than I want my finished band to be. So I'm going to wrap it around at the 5 spot on the mandrel here. And again, just taking both sides and just wrapping it and making sure it's nice and tight. There. It's a little bit bigger, so I'm just going to push it a little tighter there. There. So I slide that off, and there. So now we've got that another nice little ring, but obviously you can see it's quite a bit smaller than that guy. But then once we fuse it and texture it, it will be sized up to the 7. So in the same fashion as I did the previous 2, take your Tronex cutters, make a nice flush cut. I'm just going to open that up a little bit so I don't mar that other piece. And you can kind of tell in this one it's kind of like pushed out a little bit. So I'm going to come back here on this seam here where it's nice and it's a little bit more at the curve. So I get that nice shape. Again, just make sure that your Tronex are straight across. You want a nice flat even cut. Trim that off. So I've got a nice cut there. And you can always tell too when it reflects there. There's no burrs or anything, so you know you have a nice connection. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, not overlapping, just because you just want those seams to meet up. It's kind of hard to see that silver, but it's ending right there. So, and again, just make sure your pliers are nice and straight, because these have got an angle, so it's like your pliers might not be straight, but your cutter is nice and straight there. So just trim that. And there, I've got 2 nice flush cuts on that. Taking your nylon pliers, and I'm just going to work it back and forth to close that ring. All right. That one's not too bad. You can kind of see that it's ever so slightly kind of just curved in a little bit. So I'm going to take my nylon pliers, and I'm just going to just kind of squish it, just to kind of straighten that up a little bit. And that's, looks like it took most of that out here. I'm just going to do a little bit more. There. And make sure it's still nice and closed. And there, we should be good. All right, so I've got 1 5, and I'm going to just do 1 more 5. So again, in the same fashion as we did our other ones here, I'm just going to bring my ring mandrel down. I'm going to wrap it at the 5, because we want this one to be a finished size 7 after we texture it. So you just pull the 2 sides over there and then just wrap it tightly around there at the 5. All right. So there you've got your nice ring. And then just in the same fashion as we did the other ones, take your Tronex cutters and you do a nice flush cut. And again, I always just like to open it just slightly so that I don't mar the other loop there. Again, just make sure that your cutter there is nice and straight across. And then do the same thing on the opposite side. Again, you don't want it to overlap. You just want them to meet up. Nice and straight, and give it a cut there. So I've got the nice flush cuts on both sides. And then just using my Nylon Jaw Pliers again, just going to go ahead and work it back and forth and close that. All right, that one is nice to go. All right, so there, I've got a couple of rings to get started here. And I always like to make a few at a time, just in case, because, you know, something can go wrong when you start to fuse them. Things can melt, or maybe your connection's not as good as it was, and it pulls apart instead of actually fusing together. So sometimes it's nice just to do a couple. Then that way, since you've already got your station set up, you can just keep fusing along. So I've got 2 that I've already sized at size 7. And then I've got these 2 little guys at size 5. So these ones are just going to be plain, simple bands. We are not going to add any texture to them or anything. We're just going to fuse them, and then we'll tumble them. And then these guys, we're going to fuse them, and then we're going to put them back on the ring mandrel. And using a chasing hammer, we're going to add texture, and that will also work up the size. So I'm going to get set up for my fusing station, and we're going to fuse these guys, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so I just wanted to go over the features on the torch and just talk a little bit about refueling it here. So you want to make sure that you use triple refined butane when you do fill your torch. And to fill it, you'll take it out of the holder, you will turn it upside down, and there is a pin in here, so that's where you fill it up with the butane. So you take your butane and you want to make sure that you're going straight up and down, and you just shoot that in there and it will fill up your torch. When it gets too full, it will start to kind of spit out butane out on the side, and then you'll know that your torch is full. So mine is already full and ready to go. You always want to make sure that you only fill a torch that is cold. Never fill one that has been used or is even just kind of warm. It's very unsafe. And then once you do fill your torch, you just want your torch to sit for just like 20 seconds or so, just to let the butane settle. So we're all filled. We're ready to go. I'm just going to set my butane off here to the side because I am going to turn on my torch. And so to just go over some of the features here, this is a button here that says continuous. So once you have your flame and you push that down, it will let you just hold onto the torch and have a continuous flame without having to pull the plunger back here. And then on this other side is where you can kind of adjust your gas. So say if your flame is not quite the quality that you need, you can adjust your gas ratio here. And then also on this knob here, you can adjust your air ratio. So that will help you kind of get the flame you want. So you just kind of maneuver those as needed to get a nice flame. Again, you always want to make sure that your torch is cold if you're adjusting this, because obviously this is metal here and it's very hot after the torch has been going. So to turn your torch on, you're going to want to, there's a little lever back here. You want to pull that down. So you pull that down and then you hit the plunger. You might have to do it a couple times until it ignites. So now it's ignited. And as soon as I let off this, it's going to go off. That's why you want this continuous. So you do that again. And then you hit this continuous button. And then that way you have the flame and you can use your torch nice and easily without having to hold down that plunger. And then when you're done, you want to turn it off, you just hit that plunger and then it turns off. And then just replace it back in your holder because that's a safe place to keep, especially a warm torch. Okay, so I just want to go over a little bit on the workstation here I have set up. So you want to make sure that you're working on a stainless steel table or stainless steel sheet or a cookie sheet to protect your work surface. We have our torch and we've already filled it and gone over how to use it, safety for that. I've got my pumice fire brick. I have 3 ring bands here already laid out, and all the seams are at 12 o'clock so that I know exactly where the seam is at. And then I have a cooling cup with cold water and some tweezers. You could also use some old pliers. And then I do have a paper towel to just dry my rings off when I'm done. So you just want to make sure too that you don't have any loose fitting clothing or your hair is not down. If you have long hair, just pull it back. And if you have any children or animals, just make sure they're out of the area just so that nobody is hurt or burned as you're fusing. So now I'm ready to go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to light up my torch just like I showed you guys earlier. So I'm just light that up and I'm going to fuse my first ring. So you just want to have the tip of the flame touching your ring, and you just want to go around in a slow and steady circle. And you want to hold your torch at a nice 45-degree angle. You don't want to go super fast because you want that heat to kind of stay on that ring band so that it heats up nice and evenly. And it starts to glow like that. You know you're getting really close. And then pretty soon it will turn to that molten color. And there's that first one. So I'm going to go ahead and do my second one. And as you can see, this ring's a little bit smaller, so it might go a little bit faster. And this is 14 gauge wire that I'm working with here for these rings. So this one's almost there. Gets that nice glow, so you know you're really close, and you can see it's all consistently heated. And there's the seam. And then I'm going to do my last one. So it's like slow and steady kind of wins the race on this. There, it starts to glow. And then pretty soon it will turn molten. And then you just feather it over that seam. And so at this point, I'm going to just take my tweezers And I'm going to just flip them over to make sure that the seam is, you can't see it on the other side. Because sometimes when you're working with a little bit thicker gauge, it won't fuse all the way through on the back, especially if you're making a ring band. 14 is normally pretty good, but I can kind of see that I have a couple seams on here that are still showing. So I'm just going to flip them over. That one actually looks like it is good. So this one's good. I can go ahead and put in my cooling cup. These two, I can just barely see a little bit of that seam still there. And so you just want to make sure that that is not showing, because when you start to add texture or to size your band up, you can end up, it will bust on you if it's not fused completely. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the same process on the other side, just to kind of finish sealing up that seam. And it shouldn't take very much because most of the seam is sealed up. It's just kind of, there's just a fine little like hairline that I can see there. So it's getting nice and molten, and then you can just feather it over. There, it's getting close. It's getting that nice red, glowing color, just like you like, and then you just feather it over. All right, so I'm just going to set my torch aside because it's very hot, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up these two, and I'm going to put them in the quenching bowl. Then I'm carefully going to put my brick to the side, holding on to the edges, because the top of it obviously is extremely hot. And I'm just going to grab my paper towel here, and I'm going to take out my rings. And I'm going to just dry them off and just look at them. And at this point, I can see that they're nice and fused and got good seams. So at this point, if they were sized to the size for my ring band that I wanted, I could just go ahead and put them in the tumbler and tumble them for about an hour to work harden and polish them. But if I wanted to add texture, then we will do that in the next step, where I'll show you how you can add texture and also kind of size these ring bands up. So we will get set up for that, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I just got done fusing my rings, and so I have 4 here to work with. So these two are my size 7, and so I'm not going to add any texture to these. And as you can tell, they're just nice, smooth rings. Sometimes when you're fusing, if you kind of end up losing your shape a little bit, if it's not like perfectly round, you can always put it back on the ring mandrel and then just give it a few taps with the plastic mallet, just to kind of get its shape back. If you're not going to, add texture to them. So these ones, I'm not going to do any texture. They are nice, good fused rings. They're good to go. And so I want them to have that nice, like, round shape. So they're ready to go into the tumbler. So seeing how I'm not going to work harden these by texturing them or anything, you want to make sure that you tumble them for at least an hour. Just because it is a ring band, it's going to get, beat around a little bit. You just want to make sure that that wire is good and work hardened. So I would just put those in the tumbler for about an hour. So I'm going to set those aside. These two are the ones I'm going to add texture to. So as I said previously, I'd size these as out of 5, so I can add texture to them and size them up to a 7. And how you do that is, so you're going to take your ring on here, you're going to put it on your ring mandrel, and you want to make sure it's nice and tight. Then you're going to take your chasing hammer, and you're going to want to just start hitting it and spinning your mandrel around. Because what you want to do is you want to strike it evenly all around so that it adds the same texture. And you want to make sure that you're kind of, when you are striking it, that you are doing it evenly, because you don't want like high points or low points. And I'll kind of show you how to like watch out for that. So again, just make sure it's nice and tight on there. And so I'm going to hold this in my hand. You could also put this in a vise, but I'm just going to hold it here for easeability on the video. So you take your chasing hammer And I'm going to start with the flat side, and I just start striking it. And I'm going to spin it as I'm going. You can either spin your mandrel or you can spin your ring. And so as you can see, I've just struck it a few times and I'm already down to almost a size 6. So as you're hitting it, you are working that wire and kind of pushing it out, and you're sizing it up. So I'm just going to keep going along because I just want to add a little bit of texture. And again, just make sure you're doing it nice and even, and make sure too that you're always pulling it down so that there's no air gaps underneath, that it's always hitting the steel on there. And then that way you know that you're working it evenly too. So just keep spinning. And then at some point I'll take it off and I'll just give it a look. And so it's just ever so slightly, but you can tell that it's definitely, I'm working it pretty evenly. I don't have any high spots yet. So I'm going to put it back on my ring mandrel, and I'm just going to keep tapping it. And so we're right there about at the 7. So I'm going to slide that off. And so here you can see I just have this, it's got ever so slightly a little bit of texture on there. And then to make sure you don't have any high points, I always just kind of look at it from the top here. And you can see that over here, there's just a little bit, it's a little higher than some of the other parts. So it's like you do want that to be nice and even. So I'm going to put that back on the ring mandrel. I'm not going to work it too much because I'm pretty close to my size, but I'm just going to tap in those few little spots just to work and take out that high spot. So I'm thinking that that is pretty good. I'm just going to double check my size one more time so see where I'm sitting at here. So yeah, I'm right at a size 7. So at this point, I'm good for the size that I wanted. So you can, if you like, for like an optional, you could take a steel bench block and put the ring down on the bench block and then hammer it a little bit to kind of square off the edges so that it looks more like, so it doesn't look like it's made with round wire, if you like that look. I'm not going to show that today, but it would just be basically, you'd just be sitting on a steel block and hammering on the side, and that will just kind of flatten that out just a little bit so that it makes it look more like a square. So I've got a little bit of texture on there. So that one has just got a little bit of texture and it's pretty even. So I'm pretty happy with that guy. So I'm going to take my next one. Again, this is a size 5. So I'm going to put it on here and I'm just going to start hammering it with my chasing hammer. Again, always making sure that you're spinning it around and that you're working it evenly. And you don't have to just use a chasing hammer. You could really use any kind of texturing hammer that you want to add a little bit of texture. And then too, like after you flatten it a little bit, you could also, start to use the ball if you wanted to. So just make sure that you're working it evenly. It's always good to just take it off and make sure you're checking. Oop, got this little stuck on there. There she goes. So it's good just to take it and check it and make sure that you don't have any too high spots here. So I can tell it's getting a little bit, it's worked a little bit more here and not so much on this side. So I'm just going to put it back on there and I'm going to keep going here. And again, this is why you started with such a small ring, because as you're working it out, it's definitely getting sized up. So see, this one's got a little bit more texture. You can kind of see the texture is a little bit more in depth on this one. And so it just has this nice little reflective edge, where this one was like a little slighter. So you really can, add the amount of texture that you want. And then again, if you wanted to kind of square the edges, you could put this on a steel bench block and then give it a couple taps with the flat part of the chasing hammer. So I'm just going to check my size. I think, yeah, I'm just a little bit over 7, about 7 1/4. So I'm pretty happy with those. These ones here, seeing how I did add texture to them, that you probably wouldn't have to tumble them, but I always recommend tumbling your fused rings just because it is fine silver. especially a ring band, it's going to get a lot of wear and tear on your hands and stuff. So it's like you don't want these to get damaged. So it's best just to put them in the tumbler to further work harden them. And also, too, it polishes them up. It'll give them a nice shiny finish. And so that always makes it look nice and finished. Be sure to check out our video on how to use the rock tumbler, where I'll show you how to set it up. And that's where you could finish work hardening and polishing up these ring bands.